Hello, everyone. Welcome back to ZTalks with your host, Zaria Musgrove, where I talk about books, movies, and TV shows that relate to history and classic literature. Now, today I will be delving into the movie side of the podcast, and I will be talking about the documentary that was released and done by Netflix in 2018 called Two Catalonias. Now, this documentary looks into the 2017 referendum that was held in Catalonia in regards to succeeding from Spain and becoming independent. Now, I will preface this episode by saying that this is a very complex issue, and I just hope to shed a little bit of light on this issue so that people could understand it a little bit more if they choose to watch the film or just to gain a little bit more general knowledge. So, I will not go into everything in this episode, but I will go into, the just the nitty gritties that you need to know in order to get a grasp on this topic. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, before getting into the details of the documentary, I think it will be worthwhile just to have some background knowledge and history about Catalonia. So, Catalonia is in northeastern Spain, and the population of the people in this area contribute to 16% of Spain's population. And this region contributes to around 19% of Spain's overall GDP. So it is actually a really rich area. Not just rich economically, though, it is also rich in culture. They are said to have a really distinct culture from Spain and have been looking to succeed from Spain since at least the 18th century. Now, I'm just going to read some quotes for you guys that were written from some journal articles just so that you can get some, scholarly overviews of the history and background of this area. So you know that it's not just coming from me. So I'm gonna take my iPad here and read it for you. So the first quote I want to read is from a Spanish journalist um, from the area of Catalonia named Vicent Petral. This is from his article called Catalan Independence, an Opportunity for European Democracy. And the quote reads, Catalonia has made several attempts to declare independence. It did so in 1810, but was incorporated into the Napoleonic Empire 2 years later and then returned to Spain in 1814. It did so again on April 14th, 1931, but within hours it became an autonomous region of Spain for the first time. It did so again in October 1934, provoking a harsh repression that led to the imprisonment of the Catalan government until the victory of the Popular Front in 1936. End quote. And this history of Catalonia from the 18th century up until just before World War II leads them into another period in their history, which a lot of you might know about, which is the Franco dictatorship. And under this time period, it did not get any better. I will read for you another quote from the University of California professor Catherine A. Willard from her article Language, Identity, and Politics in Catalonia. The quote reads, the Franco dictatorship from 1939 to 1975, which curtailed a brief period of Catalan political autonomy from 1932 to 1939, barred Catalan from education, media, and other public uses. Catalonia regained political autonomy in newly democratic Spain in 1979. End quote. So, Catalan language and way of life and culture under the Franco dictatorship, it was not thriving and it was actually really repressed. And it went through all of those periods of trying to succeed a lot of times, as you've heard from the quotes, continuously since the 18th century. And that whole time period and history and background is essential for you to understand the events that happen in the film. Because I really wish that the film, I'll talk about that later, but I wish the film would have talked about this background and history just to give a little bit more context. But now that you guys have it, it'll be a little bit easier to understand some of the political and cultural and just historical lines upon which people are choosing different sides. So, into the film and the plot. So, the film looks at the 2017 referendum that was held in Catalonia to separate from Spain. And it starts by looking at two candidates that were running for an election in the same year that Catalonia was having this referendum. And the two candidates are Charles Puigdemont. I hope I pronounced that right. He was the leader of the Together for Catalonia party. This party was pro independence and they wanted to secede from Spain. And then you have the other side, which was led by Inez Arrimada. She was the leader of the Citizens First Party. She was really pro staying with Spain and working out the differences in order to get some more, some more autonomy for Catalonia. She was very pro staying underneath Spain because she was very much, you're not just Catalonian, you're Spain, you're Spanish too. So those are the two main fault lines politically. And because of these two divisions, pro union and pro independence, that is why we got the name of the documentary, which is Two Catalonias. It's actually just a metaphor for how there are two different camps towards the issue. So if you're wondering about the name, that's why. And this whole election thing takes a kind of a back burner, but really focuses on the referendum. Now, the referendum that's being held in 2017 is actually considered illegal by the Spanish government, mainly because when the Catalonian parliament actually voted for the referendum to happen, they needed two-thirds of the parliament in order to pass it. But the pro union side that wanted to stay with Spain, they actually walked out of the parliament building in protest of the vote. So even though the pro independence parties did the vote and they had a majority of the vote, they didn't do it in the presence of the full parliament or had, two-thirds majority of the actual numbers in parliament. So it was considered illegal, but they actually went forward with the referendum anyway, hence the huge focus on the referendum in the film. Because we actually start the film with people voting in the referendum and deciding if they want to stay with Spain or become independent. And we see really horrific scenes of police brutality because since the Spanish government considered the referendum illegal and non binding, they were not going to stand for people actually taking part in the vote. So they sent police over to Catalonia, and the police actually was beating people up, dragging people from the polling stations, breaking down doors, glass. Literally, people were getting black eyes, and this wasn't just men. Women could get it. Like everybody was getting harassed, beaten, brutal scenes, and because of that, I will actually put a disclaimer. There are actually some really bloody and brutal scenes in this documentary when it looks at these footage films, these clips about what happened. And because of that, if you're a little bit squeamish and you can't watch that, I would advise against it. But this whole police brutality thing did not stop people from voting, surprisingly, because there's so much footage of people getting pulled away from the polls, but people still actually voted. And the referendum actually ended up passing, not passing, but actually ended up being had with the decision being that Catalonia wanted to leave Spain. Now, the numbers surrounding this referendum, I'm not gonna get into, but the voter turnout, they had under 50% of the voter. It's just, even the referendum in and of itself didn't seem legal because I don't know, at least for me, I would seem that you would want to have more than half of the voter turnout in order to ratify something as this. But regardless, the people that did turn out and voted and actually made it to the polls despite the police brutality voted overwhelmingly for Catalonia to leave Spain. Now, as I said, this referendum was illegal, but the president of Spain actually declared Catalonia, the president of Catalonia actually declared Catalonia independent. And because of this and the Spanish government not recognizing the referendum, they actually invoked an article in the Spanish constitution. It's called Article 155, where they could actually devolve the autonomous powers of Catalonia and instill direct rule. So they actually devolved the parliament in Catalonia and forced an election, which is why we have the two candidates from these two parties running in an election in the same year that there is a referendum, because after the referendum is held, Spanish government invokes this article that dissolves parliament and forces an election to happen. But the ironic thing about that is that when the elections happen, the independent party actually win it. The independent party wins the election, and it's just ironic because they did all of this, and the Independence Party still won. But it wasn't the win that they wanted, because even though they won and had a majority in parliament, they weren't the party. No independence party had by themselves the majority, a majority vote. So the one party that actually had the most votes out of every other party was the Citizens First Party, but they didn't have a majority in parliament because they didn't have as wide and as large of a coalition as the independence parties. So the Union Party, even though they won the most votes in and of themselves, they needed a wider coalition to have a majority in parliament. So the parliament after the elections, it's it's a little bit shaky. It's a little bit shaky, and you get some turmoil because after the referendum was had and the Spanish government says that it's illegal, they actually start arresting independence party leaders. So the guy that I mentioned earlier, Puigdemont, Carles Puigdemont, he actually had to flee from Catalonia, and he was partaking in the elections from Belgium because he was fleeing arrest, because a lot of the independence party leaders got arrested for actually going forth with an illegal referendum, which I don't know, I can't really blame them because hey, the law is the law. But they got arrested, a lot of them fled. It was chaos. So after the elections, when the independence party had the majority, a lot of the leaders, they it was chaos. A lot of the leaders weren't in the country or were actually in jail. So the Puigdemont guy was actually running the party by proxy from Belgium and had somebody else take leadership of the party. It You can see how this was chaos, and because of that, the independence movement since 2017 elections has been, I would say, stalled a bit because of the weakening of the party and the arrests of the independence leaders. So as it stands now, there are still protests, um, as I understand it, yearly on the anniversary of the referendum, but the Catalonian parliament is actually trying to work with the Spanish government, and they've kind of shifted their focus to other matters such as high rates of migration in that area. So I wouldn't say, but kind of I would say the issue of independence is kind of taken the back burner. So that's where it stands now. And I actually did some additional research on this whole issue when it turns out that there is a consensus in scholarly works around this area that the reason why the 2017 referendum happened is more to be found in contemporary history instead of like history like 18th century things. So it's usually the first thing people go to saying like, oh, there's been long lasting tensions between Spain and Catalonia, like they've been at odds for years. But scholarship is coming to a consensus that the reason for 2017 actually has to do with more recent events in 2010, because in 2010 there was a statute of autonomy that Catalonia had in the works with Spain that was established in 2006. And in 2010 the Spanish government actually curtailed a lot of the parts of this statute. So when it was established in 2006, this statute of autonomy gave Catalonia a lot of economic independence and it recognized Catalonia as a nation. But in 2010, it actually weakened its economic autonomy and gave more power to the Spanish central government over Catalonia and ceased to recognize Catalonia as a nation legally, culturally, anything like that. They just wouldn't recognize it in the law. And this stoked a lot of tensions and actually led to a lot of other things happening around that time too. One thing that comes to mind from the research was in 2011 there was a big issue surrounding language and education, because under the Franco era, as I read in that quote earlier, the Catalan language was really repressed and people were discouraged from speaking it. It was not allowed to be used in schools as a language. So after the Franco government fell and Catalonia was, able to gain some more autonomy, it was encouraged to be used in schools as the primary language for teaching students in order to preserve the language. But in 2011, right before school started, Spain the Spanish government actually forced Catalonia to make Spanish one of the main languages that was taught to children in school, and this caused a lot of uproar. And it actually just did not consider like Catalonian as able to be a primary language for education. And if you see me looking down, it's obviously, I'm looking at my Lilo and Stitch notebook, but yeah, did not consider Catalonia as one of the main vehicles of, teaching children education. And it tried to shift this towards Spanish. And this issue around culture and language kind of stoked a lot of tensions. And scholars kind of really look back to this point in time when the Statue of Autonomy and Catalonia and its just relationship with the Spanish government was fundamentally changed in 2010 as the reason to why we have the events that happened in 2017. Now, that whole history and everything that I gave you can see how it is very complex and can be at times a little bit confusing. And I have to say, as much as I hate to say it, the film does not do a very good job at explaining and depicting this, because all of that background knowledge and historical knowledge and some insight into the 2010 events was not really looked at in depth in the film. Like the style of the film, well, we'll come to the style of the film now. It kind of drops you right into the middle of the film, just immediately meeting election candidates. Like we're all the way to the election in December of 2017, following election candidates, and we keep on flashing back to other moments. Like we keep on flashing back to the referendum, people getting beaten, then we flash back to some parts in 2010, and it just the style of the film is not linear. Things do not happen at a linear time pace. So it's not like January, February, March. It's like December, May, December, October. It keeps on flat going back and forth between different time periods in order to explain the full context of the situation. But it does this without telling you when you're jumping to different time periods. You think things are happening linearly when they're actually not. It's not until I did additional research about this whole area that I was able to establish a timeline of events in my head, which I think the film the film should have rectified. The only times that I actually gained some sort of insight and knowledge as to the sequence of events was when it kind of flashed to interviews, because the film mainly focuses on raw footage of things that happen at different times, but it also cuts to interviews of people that were there at the time that the events were happening, like leaders of different parties, different candidates, different officials in the Spanish government. So we get some insight as to people that were at high levels and there at the time. But outside of their comments, it's pure chaos. I didn't like the style of the film. And for that, this will be the first time that I give a piece of content on this podcast a low rating. I have to give this film 3 out of 5 stars. Like, don't get me wrong, the content is amazing. Like, this is one of the most interesting topics that I've researched on the podcast so far. But the way it was presented in the film and the pure confusion I had to go through, I can't give it more than 3 stars. I can't. And the 3 stars is for the interest that I have in the topic. So 3 out of 5 stars. And another point where it lost it with for me was the fact that it had um, cursing in the documentary. Call me conservative, I don't know, but for me personally, I feel like documentaries are really educational and they should be widely accessible to different people of different ages. Obviously, sometimes the accessibility is cut off when there are brutal scenes happening, like with blood or people getting beaten up. But in terms of use of language and cursing and stuff, I don't really support that in documentaries because it cuts off the access of education to so many people of different ages, where it's like you really just didn't have to do that. You could have, just use clean language so people of other ages could watch it. So just because of the cursing, call me conservative. I also knocked it down another point. So that's why I'm giving it 3 stars. So yeah, that is all I have to say today about Two Catalonias. Again, 3 out of 5 stars. And because of the cursing, I don't think that I can recommend this film to a lot of people. I would actually not recommend this film to anyone. I don't know if that's bad, but I wouldn't. I actually wouldn't recommend this film to anyone. I think that people should just research the topic and not watch the film. I don't think that I would ever watch this film again. It was not, to me, stylistically good. It led to more confusion around Catalonia and the referendum than it led to any terms of enlightenment around the topic. So don't watch it. That's my review. Don't watch the film. Go and do your research by yourself and just learn more about this topic outside of this film. Because if you watch the film, you might come away more confused than if you didn't watch it. But yeah, that is all I have to say about Two Catalonias. If you want to know more about this topic, do your Googles and your research. If you want to know more about other topics, you can, go and watch more episodes on the podcast. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, or if you want some, shorter content, the podcast is on Instagram and TikTok. So we're on all platforms, guys. We're on all platforms. So you can always see my face on any platform that you're on. Just follow ZTalks with Sorry Musgrove. But if you don't want to do any of that, you can just wait 2 more weeks for another episode of ZTalks.